Hello, my name is Justine Kurland. I'm an artist and an educator living in New York.
I'm Emily Nam. We are art people.
My driving force is more about, I don't know, this kind of very deep desire to find a home and find other people who see me that I can also see, that I can connect to.
Justine Kurland is a photographer, visual artist, and educator living and working in New York City. I've been learning about Justine's work in more recent years, and something that I've appreciated is the constant output of collaborative and curatorial projects that Justine produces of other artists' work. Through this, I've been introduced to photographers that I may not have been exposed to, including Josh Aronson, Martha Naranjo Sandoval, and Julia Points, poet Pamela Sneed, and more recently on viewing Justine's current series, SCUMB Flowers, presented at Dashwood Projects in New York City. It has sent me on a journey exploring the life of Valerie Solanas. Known for her utopian photographs of real and imagined American landscapes and communities on the fringe, Justine moves between mediums and embodies a practice that is inclusive and open to change as we develop and shift in whole as a society. Justine has published several books, including Girl Pictures with Aperture in 2018 and The Train with Mack in 2024. Hi, Justine. Thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
So I have recently just been to Dashwood Projects to see your presentation of SCUMB Flowers, which was really exciting to see, and also just helped me understand a little bit more about your process with collaging and how that's come about through being inspired by the SCUMB Manifesto of Valerie Solanas. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about that briefly, and we could go into a few ideas about reinterpreting that work and then also reinterpreting the books that you've been collaging.
Sure. No, thank you. And thank you for seeing the show. I began these collages probably in 2019, and I was inspired by Valerie Solanas. She wrote a book, a manifesto in 1967 called the SCUMB Manifesto, which stood for the Society of Cutting Up Men. It was a satire. She's talking about ending the patriarchal domination, the forces that oppressive forces that would want death and destruction, the creation of a superior all-female society.
Can I read the declaration that she's written?
Yeah, please.
So life in this society being at best an utter bore, and no aspect of society being at all relevant to women, there remains to civic-minded, responsible, thrill-seeking females only to overthrow the government, eliminate the money system, institute complete automation, and eliminate the male sex.
Yes, exactly. So she breaks it down, how that's to be done. I mean, I think that Valerie is probably most famous for shooting Andy Warhol, but she didn't actually shoot him because he was a man. She shot him because he stole the typescript of her play Up Your Ass.
Did he present anything with that script, or he just kept it?
She had given it to him to see if he wanted to produce a theatrical rendition of it. And then he said that he lost it. But in fact, the Warhol Foundation still has it in their archives.
Wow.
So, And so, at that point in time where there's not the internet and people don't have archives, it was like a very real fear that she had that he was going to steal her work, put his own name on it. Of course, that doesn't justify shooting. It's Valerie was a paranoid schizophrenic who was raped by her father, was institutionalized, had her uterus forcibly removed, was like, you know, like society psychoticized her. So yeah, it's so she had some delusions. She actually had gone to shoot her publisher first, but he wasn't home. So then she shot Andy Warhol and immediately turned herself over to the police. Um, and when the reporters came, when they were, you know, bringing her into the precinct, she said to them, "If you want to know who I am, read. I'm scum. Read my manifesto." So it was like, I don't know. She was just like, yeah, she's an unlikely hero for the women's movement, and but actually, the SCUMB Manifesto was the very first feminist separatist text that was written. And the reason why I'd gone on this deep research dive on Valerie Solanas is in 2019, the Whitney had a show of Andy Warhol, who is not one of my favorite artists, but a very dear friend of mine asked me to be on a panel discussion, and I felt like my only way of accessing Andy Warhol was to think about and hold Valerie Solanas. So so that it was in this thing of thinking about the SCUMB Manifesto, this real question of male dominance, and a kind of parallel moment I was having in my own life of thinking about the ways that my own visual vocabulary and language has been shaped so much by these men who have take up so much room. And the world of photography is really really dominated. The book world for sure is really dominated by men's books, the canon of photography. There was a book published by 10 by 10 called The Women's Photo Book. And in it, they had the statistic that they had done, that even though the very first photo book was was produced in 1839, or I think I'm getting the date wrong, maybe a little bit later, but very soon after photography was invented, the very first photo book came out, and it was a woman named Anna Atkins, who's a British woman who was a scientist, and they were cyanotypes of different types of seaweed and botanicals. And so even though the very first photo book was by a woman, the 10 by 10 photo book collective determined that out from I think they cut off their timeline at 2000, but from the invention of photography until the turn of the century, there was something like 85% of published photo books were published by men.
I think
So
that's
it's a kind of a
prevalent in the
crazy
art
number.
world anyway, just the white male dominance and not having much space for
Yes.
any kind of dialogue outside of that has been
Yes.
a problem. And in a way, I empathize with Solanas for that frustration. Maybe it wasn't just in creative practice, but just that kind of outlandish reaction to Andy Warhol. Yeah. And maybe we could talk about then that brutal act in a way that you're cutting up these books with a scalpel, I assume, but then it's quite a delicate reinterpretation. And particularly in this exhibition, you've got William Eggleston's The Democratic Forest, which is quite it's a very beautiful and just the relationship to plants and nature. It's not, I don't feel it's an aggressive act. And so I'm wondering if you could just, what is a radical feminist in 2019 that stimulated you to start this kind of act?
Well, I mean, I can think of a lot of you know, a lot of women who I think are very powerful and radical. But I'm not sure that violence is necessarily what the world needs. You know, I think that we're at a point. I mean, I definitely, when I started the collages, I wanted them to be punk. I wanted to rip them up. I was really more focused on the act of cutting than maybe repair, which is what, you know, if collage is in one part about the scissors, but it's also about the glue. So I did want them to be angrier than they actually are. I think that the artist in me kind of takes over, and I just want to make the most beautiful object I possibly can. And so, I mean, with Eggleston, with the show that's up right now at Dashwood in particular, it's different. There's been a few iterations of how these collages have evolved over time. But in this case, I'm looking at this one photographer who is probably the most resourced of all living male photographers. I mean, he's from the South. He was one of the very first color photographers who was shown at the MoMA. And this man, John Zarkowski, who has since passed, who basically made the canon of photography. I mean, he wasn't the first photo curator at MoMA, but he was the first photo curator where photography really began to take itself seriously, or was taken seriously, and really formed these kind of core ideas about photographic form and all of these kind of modernist distinctions about what was and wasn't acceptable inside this very narrow gauntlet of photography. So, there might have been like a token person of color, there was a token queer person, there was a token woman, but it was really a boys' club. It really, really, really was. And so Eggleston was this man who lived in the South. He's very wealthy, and he's an alcoholic. I mean, his family, his father was a judge. His family owned slaves, and he says in the introduction of the Democratic Forest, in this introduction written by John Zarkowski, that his compositions are based on the Confederate flag. His photographs mostly are of cars, Americana, in these kind of incidental, very kind of beautiful photographs of nothing. The photographs are really quite stunning. I mean, that's why I had, just to go back to say that the books that I cut were the books in my own personal library. So Eggleston was someone who was, taught to me, that I revered, that when I think about like what a photograph is, that's part of what my understanding of it. So recently Steidl, which is like for book publishers, is like the top book publisher. It's like the Rolls Royce of book publishing. It's a German company that Gerhard Steidl, there's documentaries about the man. He it's the best inks, it's the best papers, the books are like candy. He's been going back through these men's archives of these older photographers and printing reeditions of classic photo books, where now he's printing every single frame the man ever took. So now a book that had 35 plates is now a 10-volume set with like thousands of pictures in it. So it's this kind of like, re-heroicizing these people who are already heroicizing, giving more space to people who have already taken up so much space, resourcing people who are so resourced. So when I was going through that book, he's photographing outside, and inevitably there's these pictures of flowers around, and sometimes intentionally he makes a photograph of like flowers on a vase, but it's not what he's known for. It's not what the work is. I went through the 10 volume, and I cut out every single flower that appears in the pages, and reconfigured them into these kind of hybrid bouquets of flowers that would never like fit together or be together again. And part of the reason why I got obsessed with this idea of flowers is because I was thinking a lot about Georgia O'Keeffe and Judy Chicago, and these kind of tropes of like, what does feminist art look like? Is it Judy Chicago's dinner table? Is that what we have? Like, and how is like images, like, is there an equivalence to like a phallocentric, like type of like, like what are those odalisque and in the Washington Monument or something, if there's these penises these men put out in the world, is there an equivalent vaginal or I was really interested in thinking about like how to take collage specifically out of this masculinist idea of Picasso inventing the collage. So I was interested in decorative art, but I was also interested in this kind of equation of flowers to genitalia, and this idea with George O'Keeffe specifically that Stieglitz was the one who made this equation of those paintings and female genitalia, and it was something that she had never wanted, but Stieglitz wanted to get her out of this woman ghetto of this idea that men paint women and women paint flowers, and he wanted to elevate the work by saying that in fact she was painting women too.
Well, I do think flowers
yeah.
are that representation. I mean, the flower in its own botanical form is the receptacle of feminine botany. But it is interesting that you've reinterpreted it with the use of flowers, because it's in a way the opposite. And just going back to this layering of all these different types of flowers, my sense of it was I just felt very, very tropical. Like it was such a strange experience because of how it had come through that layering of, I guess, these just random things you'd put together.
They're very lush.
Yeah,
the flowers are
lush.
very lush.
It's very lush, and it's got this really nice feel to it compared to maybe your other collage, which I have seen, which are maybe a bit more feminine or flower orientated. This felt more lush, like entering into a space, and they're quite small, which I liked because and I was interested in asking about scale and how you approach scale, because some of the other collages you do are much larger and circular.
Well, the first collages I made, I used the book covers themselves. I splayed them open and I used them as a substrate on which to collage, so that it was this kind of economy of using the book itself and adding nothing else to it and just keeping the book inside of the book form. But then, then I kind of went larger and wanted these kind of sprawling shapes. But that show in particular, I'm using the pages themselves. So each collage has a white border around it that is the white border from the page. The edges are ripped where I ripped them out, and they're all titled by what the page number is on them. But yeah, no, I mean, I was the larger collages, I was also trying to think about this idea of like what a feminist form is. And I also went on a very deep dive with Jay DeFeo, thinking about the rose and thinking about this kind of idea that happens in this piece that's at the Whitney that's, I don't know, it's like 12 feet tall. It's like maybe a foot deep. It weighs two tons. She made it also the same year when Valerie Solanas was writing the SCUMB Manifesto, by mixing mica with paint. So they're, and I think she just used house paint, and then she ladled with like one teaspoon at a time, to make this ginormous, it's kind of more like a star than a flower, but the circular kind of radial form. But I was really interested in Jay DeFeo because of this idea of like accretion and building something up, and the force of attention to transform something into a ritual action. And after she made that monumental piece, she started, I guess, it had to be cut out of her studio, but she turned to photography then, and from photography started working on these collages. And in the collages, she called them member objects, but she would photograph things like the broken handle of a cup that a friend had given her, or her teeth started falling out because she chewed on her paintbrushes and got gum disease from the lead in the paint. Yeah. So, and she had a bridge. So she would photograph the teeth, and then she would often photograph her paintings in progress. But what's interesting about the way that she photographed, painted, and collaged is that she would then paint the collages that she would then re-photograph and collage again, and it became this kind of circularity that through these acts of translation, she was creating these kind of microcosms where things kind of move around and create a new sense of value. That seems to me like a really kind of fundamental reason why I wanted to start making collages to begin with, is to kind of break out of these kind of canonized hierarchical systems of power that feel like very much aligned to political and social types of power that we already exist in. So if it seems like there's something speculative and a kind of possibility with collage that opened up, and yeah, I took that from Jay DeFeo, but I think that there's many other. One of the things that I've done recently, actually not even so recent, it was like a year and a half ago, I curated a show of 44 collage artists that were some were friends of mine, some were already part of a collection where I did the collage show in Portland, Oregon called the Lumber Room. And now it was like my favorite thing that I've ever done as an artist, actually. And
The
now for the
curation of the
last,
show was a
yeah,
favorite thing. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because it was like I was, I had just torn down this pantheon of like male artists, and I'd like had this opportunity then to like kind of build up a new pantheon, a new like kind of sense of possibility. And I feel like collage in and of itself creates the space, like it opens up, like this act of cutting and bringing things back together creates the space to open things up.
Yeah,
But
I think it's like this
yeah,
unyielding energy because you're breaking it down, but it's still the matter exists. And then you have the possibility to bring it back. To not
yeah,
say that the work previously was not good, but it needed to be broken up. And even just in creative practice, I feel sometimes you need to just destroy something and
yeah,
it
yeah.
kind of unleashes something to then bring it together. And if you're talking about this curation, it's kind of like you were collaging
Mm,
the people or something. I don't know. It was
yeah, yeah,
like this new reformation of how to look at something
yeah,
while
yeah.
celebrating, or not even celebrating, but acknowledging what was before,
Mm, mm. Yeah.
or
No,
how it
totally. I
informed
mean, I think
you,
it's,
like these people that you were kind of brought up to look at and revere as, uh,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
Well, now we're working on this catalog. So it's been like, it's also preoccupied like a really huge amount of time. And I'm writing these didactics for each of the 44 artists. So it's like a tremendous, for me, a tremendous
Wow,
amount of
yeah.
work because I'm not a writer,
But you seem to be doing a bit
but
of writing. Just to jump
yes.
into that, I think you say you're not a writer, but something that I find interesting about your work is, I guess you are a photographer, but you're not necessarily just engaged in photography, and you've been able to somehow unify that space with the collage and the curation and writing in a way
Yeah.
to um, bring together whatever it is that you need to communicate. And has that been something that's developed over time, or was it always
Yeah.
present?
Well, I was thinking about this conversation that we've had many times coming in and out of the studio and when we chat with each other. This whole question of how we build the art world we want to, like the
Mm-hmm.
reason why
Mm-hmm.
you've made this podcast. um I know you've been doing some curation also, and like all of these different ways that we can kind of deinstitutionalize our lives, and feel a little bit more empowered, so it's like, I guess the kind of old school approach is that like the artist like cuts off their ear and goes off and like is siloed off and creates a whole bunch of art, and then the gallery comes and takes that art and places it into collections somehow, and then the art critic comes and writes about whether that work is doing anything or good or bad, and so there's
Mm-hmm.
like what seems to be, and this is how I kind of like bring it back around into like my thinking about collage, what seems to be like this more interesting model is that maybe we can all like wear different hats, and that we can advocate for each other, and give shows for each other, and curate for each other, and write for each other, and collect each other's work. And I often like whether I'm doing a fundraiser or um, I'm supporting someone else doing a fundraiser, it's this idea that it's like the same $50 keeps getting passed around from one artist to the other, like in this kind of idea of support, which I really, it wasn't always that way. I went to school at Yale, and especially when I went to school, it was really about a model of scarcity, and this idea that like you step over the dead bodies to like try to reach to the top. And it was very competitive, and you know, it was pretty terrible. And I think that there's you know, there's things, I think things have changed. When I started teaching myself, I taught the way I was taught, which is like a terrible way to be taught, which is like, you know, telling people how terrible and everything that they don't know, instead of just like inviting them to learn things or to kind of explore and expand things. So there was a very slow trajectory for me, a learning curve myself in learning how to teach artists, which I think is like also was really important in thinking about like breaking some of the cycles in which, well, I think making art is almost impossible anyway. You know, it's like financially impossible. Uh, you know, it's so difficult to be able to kind of continue on when we live in a society that devalues art so much, or only values this kind of 1% of art that then anyway, I just think that there's something about the idea of like supporting each other, and yeah, so writing and curating is a way of like feeling a little bit more empowered in like who the artists are that I want to be looking at, who I think are important. And um you know, so for like this collage show, um there's a woman named Keisha Scarville who is you know, she's getting more and more attention now, but um she's my age. She's incredible, and she's about to have her first museum show at the ICP. But I put her in a show a couple of years before that happened. She was showing at Higher Pictures, and she had a book come out with Mack. There's Shayla Miller is in the show. She's also a really phenomenal artist who's a singer who goes by the name of Freddie June, and often collaborates. She just did this collaboration with Sable Elise Smith. Pamela Sneed is in it, who's going to be the next show at Dashwood. With Pamela Sneed's a pretty well-known poet and activist and educator, but for the last I don't know how long, maybe like 5 or 10 years, has been making these incredible watercolor paintings that she also puts her poetry into. So there'll be a show of that. Yeah, but it's just this exciting thing about like thinking about these artists that are
Of
like,
course.
yeah.
And just coming into new, I think what I think about a lot, and just going back to this idea of supporting community, and you made this comment about it's hard to make art, and it is very hard to make art, and it's hard to make art if you're trying to make art for the commodity of the art world. And I think what needs to be nourished or refocused on is making art as a process for communication and expression of the individual, and how to navigate that without first, I think that in itself is hard, you know, finding that voice within yourself, and then to be distracted by the external like expectations limits your ability to go deeper into the spaces that I think is what makes an artist, and being an artist, really quite a powerful gift and opportunity. I think through developing these communities and collaborating, and you do a lot of collaboration and you're bringing a lot of artists in, I feel holding space and making it, giving permission. And I think for the word affirmation, and I want to ask you about how you go through this process of affirmation, of stepping into these projects and going, well, this is how I want to envision things, how I want it to be, so I'm going to do it, as opposed to, you know, you've had a lot of success in shows and you could push yourself into that other direction. But I feel from what I see, you're constantly curating younger artists and collaborating. Like even your current show, you've got Ariana Reigns doing a zine with the poetry. Like you're constantly bringing other people into your projects and pushing other people's work. That is the direction that we need to go, even in New York City. You know, like in smaller communities, maybe it's a bit more accessible because that need for community and connection is less tampered by the art world. But I also
Mm-hmm.
think it needs to exist. Like we all need that sort of human participation.
I always think that things are better with other people.
Sure.
Like,
Mm. Mm.
I mean, there's sometimes you want to be alone, but it's like, it's nice to go to a movie with your friend. It's nice to, um, but I learned at a certain point that like, um, maybe I learned it when I was started making books, and then editors would come in and be like, "Oh, you shouldn't, it should be this sequence, or you shouldn't have this work in, you should have that work in." And at first I would like really fight and be like, no, that's not my vision. And I was like, kind of prima donna about it because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like that's the way that you were supposed to be. But actually, what ends up happening is the more air you let into the room and the more you let other people who are like maybe very good at like graphic design figure out something about that, and you let them do that, then everything that they're trying to say and everything you try to say actually becomes louder. Like I just don't think that anyone does anything alone.
Sure.
I just
Yeah. And
don't
I
think we
think it
do.
can,
Yeah.
you can learn from each other um,
Yeah.
and even these conversations, it's like just stimulating different ways to think about how to approach something. It's,
Yeah.
if you're stuck in this cylindrical or, a
Yeah.
box of like thinking, nothing will change.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
No,
sort of being,
we
it's hard because you don't want to be pulled away from what you're doing, but you also want to think differently or question what you're doing or
yeah.
question how you're approaching something.
Yeah, and I think if there's something that like for me anyway, if I feel really strongly about it and someone is saying like it should be this other way, I'll fight for it, or I'll make my argument, and but I just don't think that compromise is a bad thing, and I really do feel like we need each other. But I want to go back to what you said about affirmation, because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's like such a beautiful word and such an important word, because I think that like when I talked about the scarcity model in this way that I was educated, or this kind of way that the art world can feel a little bit nasty and catty and mean, is really has to do with this this kind of mono idea of like it's like my way or the highway, this one thing that has to happen. And the idea for me that is just kind of beautiful about the idea of art being affirming, is that it is the possibility of you know uh seeing others and being seen by others. It's like if there is, like we were talking, or I think you said something really lovely about art being about this communication, but there's also something um about a desire to make art to be able, which I think is also a communication, but is a way of like, of how we affirm others, and how we kind of balance the affirmations of others and the kind of uh while still asserting our own personhood.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something really beautiful in that
Yeah,
is
I
really
think
kind
because
of deep.
yeah, we can just from, even if the person is not living, you can get affirmation from someone in their work or how they've approached something, and it can be very guiding to just see it in a physical manifestation. Like you might have an idea and then you're not sure about it, but then you might see someone has done something similar, and it just validates that thought to give a bit of confidence to go, well, yeah, I can pursue that, and it's
Yeah.
okay because we're vulnerable people, and like everyone is, and
And
you
the
have to really push through to and maybe I want to ask you about this is like, we can have many ideas, but what makes you pursue something, for example, to produce a book or to produce a project and go through a series of work? What's that
mm,
difference between having these ideas, which can come through, to really making
to
something happen?
um well, I guess it's this for me anyway. Yeah, no, it's a good question.
It's probably a bit of a life question
Yeah,
because
no,
it's a constant, like, I think, thing that you develop skills at.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was gonna say something about like, with the collages, like it starts in this conceptual place, like like that the collage project as a whole is like an homage to Valerie Solanas, or I should say femage to Valerie Solanas. Um, but it doesn't, for me, the idea is interesting and it kind of maybe gets me at the door and gets me in the studio and gets me working. But I think that there's something about being in the engagement that like then makes me want to do more. It's like it's the making of things that makes me want to make more of the things rather than, but I know not every artist is like that. Some artists are very conceptually driven and it's the concept. If they have a good idea, they're going to do it. And if it's a bad idea, they won't do it. And they like spend a lot of time wondering whether the idea is bad or not. But it's almost like I have to think through making. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I've started many bad ideas that are, that either uh, like turn into a better idea because I kind of refine it through the making, or it stays a bad idea, but like whatever I'm doing is not necessarily validated because of the idea, so I feel like there's like I almost feel like
You've got a stepping point. Like the idea is sort of
yeah.
putting you into the studio, and then it's through that process of physical interaction with whatever material you've got
But I think that the thing that ends up
generates.
happening, that the kind of my driving force is more about like, I don't know, this kind of very deep desire to find a home and find other people who see me that I can also see, that I can connect to. There's like, it's a very kind of it's a very romantic notion maybe of like, wanting to find my people. And so when I'm making these things, like even something destructive like cutting out of the books is like the reason why I am talking about like having this, curating this collage show, is because I made literal space on my bookshelf, that now I have the room to like bring in other photo books that are women, are people of color, are queer artists, so it's like there's and yeah, and I think that drive to like kind of form these places where I'm safe and I'm with others, that that there can be this affirming
Mm-hmm.
exchange that
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about, like starts as early as like my first body of work that I'm known for, which are these teenage girl photographs where I went around and staged pictures of like groups of girls in the woods, imagining this, that they had run away from home and formed communities together. So it's like this kind of ongoing thing. It might look different in these different projects, but it's like kind of ongoing. That's more the drive of like, so deciding what I want to do is less like about like, oh, should I cut flowers out? It's just like I just have an impulse to do it, but it always kind of like it's kind of magnetically pulls towards this kind of
Mm-hmm.
this thing that now as a 55-year-old person I can recognize as this kind of driving force of like all the work that I've done over the years.
So I wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
the girl pictures.
Oh yeah.
Um, and in a way, I was curious if that was about you finding connection with maybe a part of yourself that you were trying to explore or
Mm-hmm.
validate or understand, and how you've used work. I think a lot about, a creative practice and life is not separate. And through my own
Mm-hmm.
work, I'm understanding that, it's not just making work. There is some investigation, as you're just talking about, the magnetic pull, and for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think through that, we grow and develop and understand ourselves. And then that shifts the new projects or investigations. And so, how did that connection of those girls and building that body of work, were you aware of what you were doing at the time, or is it something you've reflected on now as being very formative for you?
Well, it's interesting because I think when I was making that work, it was very intuitive. Like it started because I was dating a man at the time, and he had a daughter who had been living with the mother, and the mother was like sent her to live with the father because she was skipping school and smoking pot and getting in trouble, and the mother was like, you deal with her. And so the girl came, and it was in between my 2 years at graduate school, and I didn't have air conditioning, but this guy had air conditioning, so he would go to work, and I would hang out with the daughter in this air conditioned apartment. And we just like were bonding, and I like much enjoyed her company to his company. And she was like, I should just run away from home. Like, I probably was a terrible person for her to talk to, because I was like, I was an adult, but I was like, oh yeah, let's make pictures and pretend that you're run away. And like the first pictures that we made, we went to Port Authority bus terminal, and like I dressed her up in all these raggy clothes, and I was like, drawing from some kind of cinematic, like, Agnes Varda's The Wanderer, these kind of like cinematic tropes that I was enamored with as a kind of like what a kind of coming of age story would look like. But as I was making the pictures, it started there, and I kind of kept going. And at a certain point, became more interested in where the girls would arrive rather than where they'd run away. So like the photographs became more Edenic and more about them building camps in the woods and these kind of very homoerotic kind of activities between the girls, and this camaraderie that they would have. And this is before I dated women, so it wasn't like I was trying to enact some kind of erotic fantasy. It wasn't sexualized at all. And in fact, I was very careful when I was making the pictures to kind of pull the camera back, and not like, it wasn't about like showing young girl. Like I think the reason why I was interested in these teenagers was because I felt like they were at this point where they still had one foot in childhood and all the kind of joy of childhood, but then had the agency of an adult. Like they could go and drive a car, or do go places or do things. And so it felt like there was this kind of possibility. And I think I was looking at my own life at the time, realizing, like, I think it was like 28, my Saturn returns, realizing that all of the choices that I had made had cemented a certain trajectory that my life was on, and that they were at points where they still had choices in front of them. And that seemed very exciting to me. But then, yeah, it was interesting when I showed that work in the 90s or the early 2000s. It got attention. It was like the first work that I had an exhibition in with, and the conversation around it was really about stage narrative photography, about truth versus fiction. It was about the onset of digital media, like how can we know what's true? It was about like Cindy Sherman's film stills. There was like a lot of conversation about, I mean, I feel like Cindy Sherman's film stills is probably more to the point of like female roles, but there was a lot of conversation that was not really what the photographs were about for me. And then in 2018, I had this show of the vintage prints of that work, all 69 of the pictures that I had made, which is was the number. It wasn't like some weird sexual innuendo, but whatever. There were 69 of them. And then when that happened, Aperture published a book of that, and the book came out right when COVID hit. So, the work is like really like suddenly distributed to a larger population. But those girl pictures, because I first showed them in the 90s, had lived in the internet, had traveled on Pinterest. Like people would say, oh, I knew those pictures, I just didn't know you had made them, so they existed as a kind of like cultural. But also when they came out again, it was like, the Me Too movement, it was the Trump presidency, it was like we just lost our reproductive rights. Like there was all of these things that made the kind of underlying feminism of that work very important. That was like, but then I was talking about, and COVID had hit, so it was also like everyone was so isolated and so alone and needing community so badly that that fantasy of like being together with this large group of friends was just like I think very appealing. So the book got it like a lot of kind of a lot of play. It was like at one point it was like trending on Amazon along with like Obama's memoir. It was
Oh,
like
fantastic.
you could buy it at Walmart or something. But what's interesting about that is like, I never expected when I was making that work that it would be ever have that kind of like public scrutiny, or like, it's just a very strange, it's a very strange thing to like, start working graduate school and have that be like to be out in the world. And so there's things that I really regret about that. Like one of the problems I wrote about this actually in for Freeze magazine asked me to contribute an essay. I wrote about the whiteness of the girl pictures, so I'm a white woman. I'm going out in the world, and um, you know, first of all, America is incredibly segregated. And I traveled in white spaces. But it wasn't like, of course, I asked everyone to come. There wasn't like, I just want to have white girls in these pictures. But I think that there was, there were, the thing that I regret is that I didn't work harder to be more inclusive. And part of that was a kind of identity politics that came out of the 80s, which was a real stay in your lane kind of idea with photography, because photography has such a bad long history of like white people going to communities of color and making really exploitive photographs. So
When they don't necessarily understand or have any
yeah, yeah.
place in their
And
dialogue. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I think
So
like so much would have
yeah.
changed in that time that you made those images to where when the conversation started happening, like even conversations just about becoming and female identity, those topics were very different from when you were making those photographs, that
Mm, mm,
in a way that they were very early in even your own process of just thinking about how you want to make work.
mhm,
Like I don't think you
mhm.
can sure that I think you can reflect, of course, but you can't
Yeah.
really
Well,
do
it's
anything
interesting. I
about
mean,
it. They were made and they've influenced people in whatever ways that they have.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
definitely like this group of now younger photographers doing those becoming of age bodies of work. And it's,
I mean, I think photographers have always done coming of age. I
yeah,
don't know if it's necessarily, I mean, it's just like with literature too. It's there is something kind of
well, it's the transition of and the
yeah,
tension and the suffering and the pain of
yeah. Of, of,
childhood.
yeah.
And maybe we all go through it,
Yeah.
so it's relatable.
Yeah. 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 No, but the very last picture in Girl Pictures is this picture of this Black girl running through a burning forest. And I had been driving through Alabama and I saw this. It wasn't a forest fire, it was like slash and burn agriculture, but it was really kind of incredible looking. And I knew I wanted to make a photograph there. And I pulled into this town and it was like very just trying to find girls. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I would just go into these towns and I would look for girls and I'd be like, come make a picture with me. Um, but this girl who I found this one girl who wanted to do it, um, but her mother was like, "There's no way I'm gonna let you go with this white lady like in her car to some out of the way place to go make a photograph. I'm coming with you." And it's the only photograph in the book where the mother is standing with me besides me as I'm making the photograph. So she let her daughter do it, and we made the picture. But yeah, she's there with me, and I wanted it to be the last picture in the book because you know when you were saying that other people are making like photographs, like because that work's 25 years old, like it's time to update those pictures. I was thinking about this question of this problem of the whiteness of that book, and thinking that it was really like it's a baton. It's like I want other people to kind of talk about girlhood in like a more um expansive way. And so yeah, I hope that that happens because I feel like yeah, I mean
Well, it's
we're just
definitely a
like
dialogue and it changes.
weeks away from the election where it's like, oh my God, like is Trump really going to be, are we really going to have a rapist, misogynist, xenophobic, horrible, insane person as a president? And is America like too misogynistic and racist to have a Black woman as president? It's like it's like such an important
the conversations that will be had will be so vastly different
Yeah,
depending on the outcome, which
yeah,
is horrific. I just wanted
yeah.
to ask about the mother and her daughter. Do you share the images with them? Like, do you get people's details, and do they get to be included
Yeah, I
in the
mean, it was a
work, or
long time
how will you?
ago, right?
Yeah,
There was no internet. Like
sure.
people didn't email, but I would mail photographs back to the people.
Mm-hmm.
So
So they've
there's
got a
I would
copy.
yeah, I would be on the road for like however many months I could afford to be on the road, and then I'd come back and I'd print everything and I'd print multiple copies. Um and then mail them to the like small prints and stick them
Mm-hmm.
in the mail to the
Mm-hmm.
people.
Like old school,
Yeah, and then I would often
the
like when
lovely
I'd go
way.
back on the road, I would try to find the same girls because then like certain girls I would be like I photographed over and over, it
Mm-hmm.
was good, and then they would bring more friends and like so it was like it accumulated like this kind of yeah.
You make a lot of work out of New York. You grew up in, oh, you're very present in New York City growing up
Hmm.
and through education. And so you've go away and make these works and then come back. And then how do you see New York as this place for presentation of work or documenting away from New York, and just that conversation that you have being away?
Yeah, my mother did Renaissance fairs, which I don't know if you know what they are, but they're like Um, and she wasn't even a Renaissance enthusiast. She was a crafter. She sewed clothing. But there are these reenactments of England in the 15th century that happen all over the country. So we would travel with her up and down the East Coast to these different Renaissance fairs. And so there's something about the road trip that like it's for photography, like it's definitely part of this kind of colonialist westward expansion of going west and bringing the news home, this land grab. Like the camera and the gun and germs are like the way that the West was settled. Um, but there's this other, and um, as growing up American, there was like, this sense of like going out west was exciting because I'm like, saw the same Levi jean ads as everyone else. But there was something about living out of a van and doing that with my mother that made it more possible for me to like live on the road. And so when I had a kid who's actually today is his birthday, he's 20
Oh,
today.
happy
Yeah.
birthday.
Yeah. So it was a long time ago. We lived out of a van. We spent 8 months of the year living in a van. I like, taught him to read from his car seat. Like he thought it was normal to be on road trips. He thought other kids were living out of their vans. And yeah, it was kind of how
Well, it
I
was
made
normal
work
for
for
you,
like
I
two
guess, because
decades.
yeah, you
Yeah.
had it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was um and there's something so amazing about like the sense, well, you're from Australia, right?
Yeah,
So the sense of like going somewhere else is like very exciting. Like there's like this
sure.
this
And
place
just the
out there,
freedom of
right?
going into a different place and like seeing a different culture, and or just in a different
Yeah.
environment is so stimulating.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why I just
Yeah.
wonder how
Yeah.
you have this such contrast. And I mean, I have it too. It's like the Australian
Yeah.
landscape for me, and then coming to New York.
Mm.
It feeds different um creative needs by having that. And now just yeah, you obviously balance it because you are in New York and you've chosen to be here and engage
Yeah.
in it.
I have a tenement apartment on the Lower East Side that cost $900 and it was 400 when I moved in. So it's like you can hear the music outside. I don't know if you can hear it. It's pretty loud. Um yeah, it what afforded this kind of like home base that was very cheap, but also a place where I could come back and like I mean, I waitressed, I printed for people, I assisted people, whatever I did, I knew I could come back and like work for a little while and make a bunch of money and save it up and then go out again. Like it was like a very good like that. But now that I'm like an older person and I feel like I've aged out of road trips a little bit, I don't know. I love New York. I really I love how you can go to a different neighborhood and it's kind of like going to a different country sometimes. So there's a lot here.
That's great. Okay, well, I'll let you go.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
so,
much.
yeah, I love talking to you, Emily. I'll see you
See
in
you
the studio.
soon. Thank you for listening to We Are Art People. You can listen to full episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We are online at www.weareartpeople.com. Sign up to our newsletter for show updates and happenings, and please share with someone who may enjoy listening. See you next time.